Good morning, and welcome back to Yahweh Ministries. Have you ever caught yourself pointing out someone else's mistakes before dealing with your own issues? It's so easy to scroll through social media or chat with friends and silently, or even not so silently, judge what other people are doing. Sometimes we notice every little flaw in someone else's behavior, but we forget to look at what's going on in our own hearts. In Matthew chapter 7, verses 3 through 5, Jesus gives us a straightforward message: to check yourself first. This passage reminds us that we need humility and self-awareness long before we start calling out someone else's problems. Today we're going to walk through this teaching together. We'll look at the context, break down the imagery of a speck and a plank, and talk about practical ways to live this out. My hope and my prayer is that by the end of this study, we'll all come away with a better understanding of how to address sin in a loving and gracious way, starting with ourselves first. In Matthew chapter 7, verses 3 through 5, it says, "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there is a plank in your own? You hypocrite! First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." These verses appear in Matthew chapter 7, which is a section of the famous Sermon on the Mount. In this longer teaching, Jesus is painting a picture of what it means to live under God's rule, which is often called kingdom living. Throughout this sermon, Jesus tackles issues like anger, lust, forgiveness, and generosity. By the time we get to Matthew chapter 7, he's focusing on how we treat one another, especially when it comes to judgment and correction. Jesus is not saying that we should never address someone else's wrongdoing. Instead, he's challenging us to do it with the right attitude. He wants us to avoid hypocrisy, which is something that shows up when we try to fix others while ignoring our own serious faults. The imagery of a speck, which is a tiny piece of sawdust, compared to a plank, a giant piece of wood, is kind of funny when you think about it. Jesus might be using humor here because the idea is so extreme. How can you possibly notice a tiny speck in someone else's eye if you've got a big wooden beam in your own? Let's unpack this passage so we can understand it better. Number 1, the speck and the plank in verse 3. Jesus starts by asking why we're so quick to see small failings in someone else's life while missing huge problems in our own. If you've ever had something stuck in your eye, oh man, you know that is super irritating, even if it's extremely tiny. Now imagine a big plank blocking your vision. That's meant to be a picture of our own sin or blind spots. We can be so focused on noticing others' mistakes that we overlook our own spiritual condition. When you're tempted to point out someone else's flaws, pause for just a moment. Ask yourself, am I doing this because I genuinely care about them, or because I want to feel better about myself? The hypocrisy of judgment in verse 4. Next, Jesus highlights the hypocrisy of trying to help someone else with their speck while ignoring the plank in your own eye. This is where things get real. We can't offer genuine help if we're blinded by our own unresolved issues. Imagine, if you will, a person who can't see clearly attempting a delicate eye surgery. It's pretty risky, right? I know I wouldn't want it done on me. In the same way, if we haven't dealt with our own shortcomings, we're not going to be effective in gently guiding others. Think about a time when someone confronted you in a harsh or hypocritical way. How'd that feel? Most of us tend to shut down when we sense people are judging rather than truly caring for us. Next is the call to self-examination in verse 5. Finally, Jesus tells us to first take the plank out of your own eye. Self-examination is a step we usually skip because it's uncomfortable. Let's be honest. It's not fun to look in the mirror and see our own faults. But Jesus says this is essential if we want to help anyone else. Once we've allowed God to deal with our own sin, we'll have the clarity we need to approach others with understanding and compassion. When you feel the urge to correct someone, try praying first. Ask God to reveal any areas where you need to change. That simple act can shift your heart from prideful to humble. And now that we've explored the passage, let's talk about how we can live it out in real, everyday life. Engage in self-reflection. We can't remove our planks if we never notice they're there. Set aside a few minutes each day to invite God to search your heart. Psalm chapter 139, verses 23 and 24 is a great prayer for this. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. This kind of prayer takes a lot of courage, because you're opening yourself up to see things that you might not necessarily want to see. But remember, when God points out something wrong in our lives, it's always for our good. Practice humility. Nobody, and I mean nobody, has it all together. Romans chapter 3, verse 23 tells us, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." Understanding this, it levels the playing field. We're all in the same boat, in need of grace. When you talk with someone about an issue in their life, do it with gentleness, not with a sense of superiority. Galatians chapter 6, verses 1 and 2 encourages us to restore others gently while being careful not to fall into temptation ourselves. Before you speak to a friend or family member about something sensitive, take a breath, take a moment to check your tone and words. Ask yourself, is what I'm about to say going to help them grow, or is it going to tear them down? Cultivate a spirit of grace. Our goal should always be to build others up and not to tear them down. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29 puts it this way: Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs. This verse, it challenges us to think about the effect of our words and what they have on people. If our goal is to encourage and support, we'll look for ways to speak truth in a loving and kind manner. Imagine two friends on a hiking trip. One friend has seriously smudged glasses, and the other has a tiny speck of dirt in their eye. The first friend with blurry vision tries to lead the way, offering advice about where to step. But because he can't see clearly, they keep making mistakes and nearly causes his friend to stumble off the trail. It's only after the first friend cleans his glasses that they can safely guide the other friend around the pitfalls on the path. That's exactly the point Jesus is making here. How can we direct someone else when our own perspective is clouded? We have to clear up our vision first, and that starts by confronting our personal issues before stepping in to help others with theirs. At the core of Matthew chapter 7, verses 3 through 5 is a call to be humble, to be real about our own faults, and to show genuine love when others. It's about recognizing that nobody is perfect, myself included, and that we all need God's forgiveness. Instead of acting like a bunch of spiritual know-it-alls, we're invited to become people who speak the truth lovingly and gently, guided by the same grace that we've received. When we do this, we reflect the character of Jesus himself. He never, ever ignored sin, but he also never, ever condemned people in a harsh and unloving way. He offered truth paired with compassion. If we want to follow him, we should do exactly the same. Let's wrap things up by taking a moment to think quietly about areas in our own lives where we might be ignoring a plank in our eye. Close your eyes, slow down your thoughts, and ask God to show you any specific attitudes, habits, or blind spots that need changing. Then ask for his help in removing them. Afterward, pray for the wisdom and humility to come alongside others with compassion, offering support rather than judgment. Also remember that we're all on this journey together, learning to walk in love and grace, one plank at a time. God bless you, and Jesus Christ loves you.